Klang, kling, klang, klappt der Hammer mit sein Gesang. Kling, klang, zerreißt die Ketten von Sklavenschwang. Und du ackerst und du säst, und du vierterst und du nähst, und du hammerst und du spinnst. Sag mein Volk, was du verdienst. Kling, klang, the hammer.
That song, what was that song?
That's a song by Chaim Zhitlowski. Chaim Zhitlowski was probably the most important American figure on the Yiddish language campaigns that went on in the United States. Actually, I would say he was considered the one person who was made Yiddish a language rather than, to analyze the language, the parts of speech and everything related to it. He was an old socialist from Russia, and this was probably one of the few songs that he wrote. He was not a poet so much as a political writer and a campaigner. And everywhere he went, he had audiences. He was part of the revolution in Russia. In 1905, came to America, and anyway, this song was called Und du ackerst und du säst, and you plow and you sow, and it was based on a German song by Lessing, who had written it, a radical writer. It was not only based, but he mostly translated it from German into Yiddish. Now, that people have a notion that that Yiddish is just a form of German, but it's really a different language. But he just gave it a Yiddish presentation, and then he added the chorus, which was Kling Klang, klapp der Hammer mit sein Gesang. In other words, clangs the hammer and molds the freedom of the people with the hammer, you see. And he adds that chorus to it, and it made a song of it. And it was probably a song that was sung probably by more Jewish workers than any other song during the period, maybe between the 30s and earlier. And he himself, can I tell a story about him? But Chaim Zhitlowski, how well he was known. When I first came to Seattle back in the 40s, after the war, I moved to Seattle. I was trying to rent a place for a public meeting, and the Workmen's Circle, which was the Arbeitering, which was the big Jewish organization, had pretty much folded up after the war and had a big building there, but which they would rent rooms there. So I was trying to get a hold of them so I could rent a room, and they were not too eager to rent anything. So when I went over to visit them, I went with my friend Dan Roberts, and Dan was Chaim Zhitlowski's son, who had changed his name. And when I went to rent the room, they were really reluctant to rent the place, and so I talked to the people from the Workmen's Circle there who were in charge of the building, and I introduced them. I says, this is Dan Zhitlowski. And the person who was renting the place says, Dan Zhitlowski, are you related to Chaim Zhitlowski? And I says, yes, that's my father. Oh, he went into the back room, he called out his wife. He said, come here, here is Chaim Zhitlowski's son. And I thought they were going to bow down. Anyway, we rented the place without any trouble. But he was very, very well known in America. And this song was also very popular. And of course, Yiddish was very popular. And that was, it was, the Workmen's Circle practically all had Yiddish schools, Yiddish classes, all of which ended at the end of the war, because the Workmen's Circle sort of almost caved in at the end of the war. I think probably the reason they caved in was because they accepted Zionism and kind of let the Yiddish go. There were many reasons for it, but I think I would say a couple important reasons. First is that the Yiddish community was more integrated in American society. There wasn't so many Yiddish speakers, and the Arbeiter was pushing the Yiddish. Also, they were based pretty much upon the garment workers, and in cities where there was not too large a garment worker industry, they disappeared. And Seattle, particularly, was never a highly Jewish working class area. In Los Angeles, it was, and New York, Chicago, where Yiddish developed in almost all of the areas of a high working class character. And that was the language of the people, the lower of the working class people. And by the end of the war, things changed a bit. I mean, the Jewish community had changed, largely because they had organized. They were among the great union organizers. And the garment workers, first in New York, was the lowest paid workers. They followed up among the higher paid workers after they organized the union, and so the whole Jewish middle class began to grow. But Yiddish was the national language. Everybody spoke Yiddish, and you had about 3 Jewish newspapers that were going out, were very common at that time in history. And Chaim wrote for all 3 of them, whoever would accept his material. And it was the Vorwärts was around at that time. There was the Freie Arbeiterstimme, which the anarchists had put out. And there was Freiheit, Morning Freiheit, which was connected vaguely to the Communist Party. None of them directly controlled by any, but pretty much both Yiddish, well, I suppose they were directly controlled. Maybe the Freiheit was pretty much controlled by the Communist Party. The Vorwärts was pretty much social democratic, and the Freie which was very artistic, a very culturally very high newspaper, was pretty much anarchist. But to say that something is controlled by anarchists is a little bit of an anomaly, because they didn't intend to control anything at that time. You know, it was just the idea of the freedom of writing, which was characteristic of anarchism. I mean, you never saw an anarchist in a black mask in those days. And in fact, it would have been ridiculous for Emma Goldman to wear a black mask under any circumstances, you know. So the Yiddish was so common, and then all of a sudden, the Yiddish theater disappeared. Everything in one fell swoop after the war, it all began to disappear, and that with the help of Israel, who declared Yiddish was not the language of the Jewish people anymore. And with the creation of Israel, there was a blanket put on what was left of Yiddish. But Zhidlovsky was, again, to get back, Zhidlovsky was one of the great Yiddishists. And the Yiddish theorists, not just, he wasn't like Peretz or Sholem Aleichem or the other Yiddish writers, but he was a political person. And he stuck to Yiddish, which was interesting. But there's too many things that you could say about him. I don't know. But I've personally never met him.